So this is our starting point for our table. So the first thing we're doing is sanding. And the reason we're sanding the surface is to get everything to an even color. So you could see at the start that there was some damage in some areas that weren't quite matching. So the first thing we have to do is sand the entirety of the table until we get a nice even finish. So one thing you need to watch out for is whether you're working with a veneer or solid wood. On this occasion we thought it might be solid wood. It's sometimes hard to tell, and once we started sanding it, we did realize there were some areas that it was going through. As you can see there quickly, that was showing that it was veneer. So if you go through the wood, you will see a kind of chipboard underneath. That means it is veneer, and you just need to take a little bit more care, because if you go through to that chipboard, it's going to completely ruin the finish that you're actually going to get. So using the Marcus sander, I think we started with about P120. It was going a bit slow, went down to 80, which kind of threatened to go through to the chipboard. So back up to 180, and just a gentle sanding, just being careful that we don't actually go through and ruin the surface. So we could use the marker all the way on the top and all the way around the sides. But getting into that little gap there, we just used a little piece of coarse sandpaper, just by hand. That was the best way to actually get in there, because if you tried to use the marker on that area, it was just going to, damage the wood and break right through the wooden surface. So although it took a little bit of time, it was the best way just to get a nice even sand all the way around that little groove under the rim. So here my dad Kirk was just using a graining pen to fill in some of the marks on the legs. Then we used some tests on the top here. After sanding those test areas off, deciding the colour that we were going to use, it's now time to stain the table. So just by hand, using a small piece of cloth, wearing the glove as well to stop getting that stain all over my hands, working around the rim, and then using it by hand to get a nice even finish across the full top of the table. So this was the first coat, and it went on not too bad here. Here I'm just using a little bit of scratch cover to cover those marks on the legs. So after putting the first coat on by hand, we're using a hairdryer to dry out, and you'll see how that changes the colour quite dramatically. And we actually discovered some areas that were, a little bit imbalanced, and it was where we had actually used the test products and then done a little bit extra sanding. So you wouldn't have thought it made a difference, but it was definitely showing up a little bit different. So all we done to make that better, just a little bit of sanding by hand on some of the areas that were a bit darker, just to again work towards a more even finish. So it's kind of a process of sanding down to scratch, applying the stain, and then a little bit of sanding where required, just working overall towards a more even finish. So after sanding it, just rubbing it all off with a cloth to get any dust off, and it's time for the second coat. Once again, just working our way around the rim, and then after that, applying the second coat of stain to the top surface of the table, and then again drying that with the hairdryer. So I think we've done 3 layers of stain in total. Now it's time to apply the lacquer. So we're just using a roller, using a bar top lacquer, and just again starting around the sides and then on top. It's really key when doing this to get a good view of the table from different positions. Where I am around the back there, you can see where the light's striking it exactly what the finish is going to be like, and that's where my dad came in, and I was just showing to get that even finish. After applying lacquer, it's important to sand off here, and that's just to de-nib the table. So any little nibs or little bumps, it's just creating a smoother surface. So again, applying the product, sanding in between, and this here I think was the 3rd layer of lacquer being applied on top. By the way, after the first layer of lacquer, it does take about a day to dry, and then the second day we started applying the second layer to work towards the end finish. So here we are, that's what we started with. So notice not just the big mark there, I think that's a watermark. On the right of the table, there's also several other scratches and little chips, and notice the legs as well, and they were quite badly damaged. The table was looking quite worn here. So these were all things that we worked to correct, and here we have the finished piece. So to summarize, after sanding it down, testing different grits of sandpaper, being careful not to break through to the chipboard underneath, several layers of stain with some gradual sanding in between, carefully working towards that end finish, which is as smooth and as even as possible.